Design thinkers, this is part 2 with building out an input field inside of Figma. So, if you've watched part 1, then let's jump into the part 2 and finish off our input field. See you in the video. Alright, here we are, design thinkers again, and we are going to be getting into the next part of building out the input field. So, we built in the first part our label, and now we have our handy dandy cool label. We can chuck in anything, and next we're going to be building out this actual input field with our bottom section. So let's get started. All we need to do is grab ourselves a frame, and then what we will do is we are going to remove the white, give it a fill. I'm going to grab a stroke, and I will pick one of my stroke colors. I am going to make this 8 pixels rounding on the corners, and while I'm at it, I will also probably give it a bit of a fill inside. Give it one of my darker colors. If you remember from last time, we had a bar there. That bar is 800. So what I'm going to make sure is using the right, of course, color palette, I will make sure that I'm going to use the dark 800 inside, and this will be called my input. So this will be the field with the input inside of it. All I need to do is I can drag that component out, add it to my input field. I will just snap it to the top and bottom, drag it above that input field, copy paste. Actually, we'll keep it over the top, of course. And as you can see, this does not line up. So all we need to do is actually change the way that we are doing our actual line. Would be centered. There we go. Because we're running into the center and this is centered, you are actually cutting between the pixels, and that's where the bar sits. And as you can see, the entire frame sits right up to the edge of that input right there, which is exactly what I want. And then the actual piece goes all the way out. I'm going to actually choose a different height. I'll go 58. That's just the height that I'll go with. There is some good UX heights. I would recommend checking out the recommended heights for input fields, but that is what I'm going with. Inside of our input field, we have 2 states. We have our where text is happening inside, and then we also will have our placeholder text. So we actually should have 2 text variables inside, not just one. The reason why is because you're gonna have 2 different states, and you want to be able to switch between them without necessarily them interacting with one another. So what I can do is I just grab the same text, because it will be the same thing, and I can put that into the middle. It is anchored off to the side, which is fine. Difference is I'm going to call one, yep, placeholder text, and I will then copy and paste, and the one will be my fill text. So placeholder, fill text, both inside my input field. And I could, but most of the time my input field will always expand and fill the container that it's in. So the text inside will always not be responded to unless we're making a multi-text field, which needs to have from top to bottom. So that means that my actual piece I'll still have it as a auto layout, but the one change that I'm going to make is just make sure that it's a fix, and I don't mind that it stacks, but I will make it stack that way, so horizontally. But that's because I'm going to have a image on the other side, and one of these texts will actually be my fill text. So I may as well call that one fill text for the time being. And one is my placeholder one, which is that one right there. I can copy that in, just paste it over the top. And as we all know, that is usually not the same color. So I'll drop it down to a 200, and I'll leave that one at the white. But the difference with this one is it's going to be an absolute. So being an absolute, I'll drag it back there, slap it behind my fill text, and I'll make sure that it is anchored center and off to the left. And I'll make sure that my input field is also cutting text. If my text expands beyond my input field parameters, it will be cut off. But that being said, I also will more than likely, for my fill text, actually have a section for it. And the reason why is because I want to make sure that the people are restricted by the text and how the text overflow works and happens. So we can select this. I'll grab that fill text. I'm going to call this fill text and section. And I'm centering that section, anchoring it off that way, making sure it cascades from left to right. And I don't want any of the padding here. I want it to actually fill the container it's in. So it fills in all the way to the edge. And as you notice, we have this padding, and that's where I want it to cut. If this text itself happened to fill, it cuts off, which is exactly what I want. Basically, it means that people could fill this infinitely and you'll never need to concern yourself. It will always cut off, always be that, but you can also restrict the amount of space that can happen. You have more control when you set it into a section than rather just using the field. That being said, text also does have this handy way that you can manage how the text responds. So keep that in mind. As we have our actual fill text, and that fill text is over the top, what we can do is do a couple of things where we could, in theory, also allow for it to actually highlight and show, so we could have it colored over the top if we wanted to. Just keep that in mind if you're wanting to hide and show any other elements underneath the two, so you can switch them if you need. But all I'm going to do is I'm actually going to set up a ability to hide that layer inside of my thing. So what I'll do right now is just hide it anyway and make sure that this is filling, which is great. But what I want to make sure is that it hugs. There we go. So if the text itself was to ever fill, this would hug and expand, which is great for a bigger text section. From here, we pretty much got those elements. We are going to build in our actual other piece here. But before we do so, the last thing is that we did actually have this padding. Now, this padding seems great, but we actually don't really want it. And we will see very shortly. So what I'm going to do is I'll make sure that this will be fixed. And instead of having any padding, I'll say no. I'll make sure it's still centered. But the difference is this section is going to be the thing that actually controls for at least the padding for the text part. And I'm going to have it on the 8 plus, that should be 12. So because we have 4 plus 4, that's 12. That means we have a 12 in here and we can also manage what we want on that other side by opening up this. And I'm going to actually just have it sit at 0. And from here, we want our actual section to fill the container that it's in. So I'll fill it. It is sitting in the middle, and I'm not really going to bother with any sort of padding from top to bottom. That is not really that necessary, but you could do that yourself if you want. Let's grab our icon and our icon section. So I have just a vector image. We are going to do, usually we'll pull it out from a actual component library, but for the time being, I'm just going to set this into my container. I will call this a icon, and side of this icon, I make sure that it sits in the center. I'll set that to an auto layout. I don't keep these as auto layouts, but good thing is as soon as I turn into an auto layout, it hugs the icon, and
and I can make sure that it actually has the 2 pixels of padding around the icon. Means that we got a really nice icon that sit in the frame really well. So that is fantastic. If I select the top, I can see that it's 14, and that seems okay. Though I will probably try to make it a little bit bigger. And what I can do is make sure that the icon really tries to fill the frame that it's in. And if I was to drag this out to 24, that seems maybe a little excessive, maybe just a 20, and that seems fine. I will leave that as is and remove the auto padding, remove the color, and this can be my icon for the time being. What I'm going to do is I turn it into a component. Good thing is, since it's a component, I can just slot it into my object here, but I don't actually, it doesn't need to stay there. I can switch it out with anything else at a later stage. So just putting in the frame is not as helpful if I wanted the ability to switch it out, modify it, and update it, which I do. What I'm going to do is actually build a button section, like a favicon area section, which will go into that corner. So basically this is going to be my input field button. So we'll just call this button. I'll grab my component, chuck it into that actual button section. I'll make sure that it actually sits centered, and I'm going to grab this. Now, as you can see, it's 58 by 58, and that's because the input field is those sizes, which is what I want. And I'm just going to grab and drag that in. Now, as you can see, because I have the auto layouts on, this actual input field section pushes everything to the side. This sits where I want it to sit, and that is awesome. It has a white, but I can remove it. Just a note is that because we have this sitting like this is the click. You can click anywhere here and the user will be able to interact with the field. This is really good because when we're communicating to developers, we said that this is a 58 by 58. This is the button size for clearing. Now the icon's smaller, but the button size for clearing is that, and that's the button. I'm going to still set that as an auto layout. That being said, I'll make sure I center the object. And because I might change the icon at a later stage, I just don't want the padding, but because I set it to an auto layout, it does happen to shrink in, but I did know what the size was. So I'll set that size right back to where it was. There we go, done. Okay, we have our button actual element inside. We have our text, we have our placeholder, we have our label, and last part is adding this little piece down the bottom. I'm just going to drag this out because this section is actually really nice and easy just to break down. There we go. So support text section. So this section holds the support text, anchors off to the right. And if I was to grab this support text section, because I have a slightly different one from the previous one that I had, 12 was the actual padding that I needed here, and I could also do 12 there if I wanted to as well. And if I was to just stretch that out, we could see that our text fills our container from left to right, and it hugs the text. It has a nice little gap of padding at the top for 4, which means that if I was to just push them right up against one another, like everything is neatly, so everything is in a good place. We don't have unnecessary elements that are floating, and that is what we want. Now, when you build a normal label section, you don't have that overlapping, you basically build it like that, where your label piece sits on top, and then it has your actual space running off the side, but really drops in. So that's where we need to take these elements and then start combining them together. So at the moment I have these two and they already stack nicely. So I'm just going to grab both those two. This is actually going to be my complete input field. So input field. So I will change that, update it. There we go. Input field. Now, this is an auto layout. It stacks, which is exactly what we want. And now if I grab my label, as you can see, pushes everything down, not what we want. But absolute does exist. So what I'll do is I'll grab my absolute. I just press and hold my arrow key, dragging that up, and it sits up there, hides that outline, and that is perfect. Being like that, we will allow them to expand with the input field. Just note that when the input field overflows, nothing is controlling for it. So the very last part that we do is actually frame this bad boy. And because I already had it as absolute fixed frame, it adopts that when you just press Shift A, which is fantastic. So I will copy and paste the label, and I'll call this my label layer. The reason why is because I already have label section, and I can remove the auto layout elements and just reposition that again. Unfortunately, there we go. Difference with this is I will drag that all the way out to that side. I'll make sure that it anchors from that side. I'll make sure it as well anchors from the top, which means it's anchoring from the top of this container, which, as you can see, the line draws back, anchors down there. That means if this container happened to stretch open, it will be connected to the top, which is good. It's fine. That's what we want. From here, all I need to do is turn that to cut, and I just let the label behave the way that the label is built to behave. The good thing is the label will expand, but it will get cut off before it overflows. It means people can't do silly things with the input section, which is fantastic. And now we have our input section right here. There we go. With our icon, with our elements, with our placeholder, with our support text, everything's in it. I'm just going to turn it into a component and set up the component part of it by going down here, pressing my plus, and I can actually push the label to my component. So now I can access my label. If you were to also, let's say, have this as a button, you could be pushing the button in as well, and that would also be pushed through, but we just have it as a normal layer at the moment. But what I will do is I grab my icon and I'm going to set this as the icon, allowing myself the ability to switch out this icon with other icons. And so we have that. We have our placeholder text that's hidden in the background. If you remember, we have the ability to fill and basically show the actual text, which is great with showing the fill text. So what I can do is I can actually do a switch where I can show the placeholder text. At the moment, of course, the placeholder text is invisible, and I can show my fill text. So we'll go to my text, and I can show this is the fill text, and that's the fill text variable, and I go up there and I go show fill text, and now we have that. And let's do the same for our placeholder text, which we'll grab and copy that. There we go. Create placeholder text. Done. We have support text. Obviously, we can show and hide our support section. We'll keep the frame and it makes sure that the frame's okay being hugged, but we'll leave the frame, but we can actually just hide our text. We'll create the text first, support text, and we will create the show text. And there we go. We have our label with all of our elements inside. If I drag it off here, now I have the ultimate label where I can switch on and off the different elements that I need. I can come into here and switch out that icon, replace that icon with another one of the icons, and I can change any of the text inside of my component. From here, we can then build out all the rest of our actual input field. What I will do is just make sure that last part was billing, and this also bills, and that this here is anchored. There we go. And there's our input field. So overall, I hope these videos have helped you. Please let me know in the comment section below. I'm always looking for great feedback from you all and understanding what I can do next. But until next time, design thinkers, keep thinking, keep designing, and I'll see you all in the next video.